Yes, hello folks, welcome to the very first in the series of podcasts with my co-host here, the excellent James Rhodes from United Muppetiers. We've been threatening to do this for a while, so delighted to finally get it up and running. This will be broadcast across both of our platforms, so you'll be able to find it if you're a United Muppetiers subscriber on James' platform and of course on mine on Beyond the Pitch. We'll see how it goes later. We still haven't decided on the name yet. Beauty and a Beast. What about that? No?
I don't know about that.
don't know. Escape convicts. I don't know. We'll come up with something appropriate. Lots of things to talk about. Of course, we appreciate you supporting this venture. We appreciate all the kind messages we received yesterday, and hopefully this is something worthwhile. So, first of many, and like I said, this will also be broadcast on our YouTube platform. So, James, how's things, mate?
Real good, real good. And you, all things considered?
Yeah, are you regretting this? All right.
No. It'll be fun. It'll be cathartic right now too.
Yeah, well, it's very, very difficult to be positive right now. Obviously, lots of stuff going on. We'll talk a little bit about the Arsenal game. I know we're a few days removed from that, but I haven't recorded since last week, so talk a little bit about that. Some of the stuff that's going on inside the club. We'll cover that. We'll cover Anthony. We'll cover Jadon Sancho. Talk quickly about the Champions League draw and a few other things making the headlines. First of all, mate, like I said, we're a few days removed from the Arsenal game, and one of the things that happens to me is I usually have two different takes. I usually have the immediate take afterwards, which is a lot more emotional, and then a few days later, a more measured take when my emotions settle down. Something bizarre happened at Arsenal. I can't remember ever feeling this way. But when Declan Rice scored, it really actually, normally I would be totally devastated. Yep. But it felt like, felt like it was something that I expected.
Yeah.
It was, I was sitting there, I was thinking about United there last season. I was thinking about United away to Brighton. I was thinking about United at home to Forest, United at home to Wolves, where both those games they really could have conceded very late. And this is becoming part of United's identity now, where it used to be part of their identity. They would score in the last couple of minutes. Now it's, we're holding on. There's nervy defending, and I almost expected it. And I wasn't completely devastated because I had no other expectation that anything else was going to happen.
Pretty much. And it's been, one of the things that I think has been certainly a highlight, well, a low light, but a highlight of United right now in this team is there's something that seems to be wrong with, either the preparation or the mental kind of fortitude. Even earlier in the game, you could see it. They score and 30 seconds later give up a goal. And of course, it makes sense then that the away record, especially in big games, has been terrible for the last year. I think one win against the top 10 away. When you're at home and you have the boost of the fans, you can mount a comeback like Forest, down 2-0 in the first 5 minutes. Again, a problem with preparation, but the boost from the fans and the support from elsewhere can drive you. But they seem to be a bit incapable of pulling that support together themselves and, dragging themselves up and getting that toughness in place. So they score one goal and concede immediately, right after working very hard to get that goal. And they had played very well up until that point in time, in my opinion. And then you look at it at the end and you can just see it coming. And you can see them kind of get frailer and frailer and frailer as the match went on. More and more nervous, more and more shaky, and then you kind of expect it, and it happens. And I think that the difference between home and away still comes down to that exact same thing: is that mental fortitude, that toughness, that they cannot seem to pull it together themselves. When they have the crowd, it helps them, but otherwise, not so much.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when you look at that one away win, it was against Fulham. Which was Garnacho in the last minute. But
right before the World Cup,
But I think when you look at what were the things we're expecting, we're going to improve on this season. One of them was going to be how they were going to do away from home. They've lost 2 of their first 4 games away from home against decent opposition. It's absolutely not good enough. I know they've had a lot of injuries. And that's something that deserves scrutiny by itself,
Yeah.
because it seems that this is something that plagues Manchester United, and it can't just be a coincidence that United pick up this many injuries. Lots of people looking at pre-season preparation, what have you. I'm wondering, is this got something to do with it? You know, Lisandro Martinez is going out, is basically going out injured of 2 of United's first 4 games. United don't have the depth to deal with that. Bringing on Maguire and Johnny Evans, I think, is an awful indictment for multiple different reasons. One, Johnny Evans is fine if you want to bring him on against Luton.
Yeah, you're seeing out a win, up a couple of goals. It's fine. Yeah.
Bringing him on against Arsenal in the game and under the caution is not something you want to be doing. And with Maguire, United had a warning right before that where the ball came across and Saka should have scored. Onana saved it. Maguire's ball watching, ball's in behind his shoulder, and didn't take the chance. Even in the corner, United had a warning about not marking the back post. And Arsenal were clearly targeting that. And again, when you look at United on set pieces, they've got the worst record for set pieces in the Premier League. That's not an accident. This is something that predates Ten Hag. You know, I mean, I remember, I think it's Eric Ramsey's a set piece coach, was brought in under Solskjaer's last year before Rania came in. They were dreadful, absolutely appalling. You go, why? You should not be conceding goals in set pieces. You're letting Arsenal win that game on a corner. If you get cut open, fine. If someone scores an unbelievable goal, fine. But on a corner, that's basic, right? You should not be. If it almost for an attacking team to score on a set piece, you have to almost make a mistake.
And from inside, practically inside the goalkeeper box too. It wasn't like outside the box or anything. It was right there, an unmarked man. You know,
Rice has the time to pull the ball down, control it, shoot before there's anyone on top of him. And I don't listen, I know United have had some decisions go against them. Garnacho could have went either way. Maybe Johnny Evans could have had a free kick. Maybe Hoyland could have had a penalty. But when you start getting down to blaming referees like United did away to Spurs, and that's indicative of the mental weakness that you're talking about. That's a major concern to me, because when I see Bruno Fernandes coming out and blaming referees, referee wasn't the guy that put a header, a 6-yard header over the bar. Right? Referee wasn't the reason why United against Spurs behaved like smack dashers, and we'll get that in a minute, because I think there was some antecedents to that we could see in the body language that I think we now know part of the reason why they were behaving like that. We'll get to that when we talk about Anthony, but these become mental habits, and winning's a habit, and you can see the nervousness in United even when they're ahead in games, that they don't trust themselves to hold on to it. That's a major concern. And I look at that Arsenal game and I think, lots of people say United played well. They didn't play too bad, there's no doubt. But are we really at the point where we're talking about, unlucky losers? The valiant losers, where we did okay, we lost, but we're okay with that. I mean, City went to Arsenal last season and tore them apart. And to me, there's other reasons beyond the playing squad that United are in this mess that we can get to. But when my feelings settled down, I actually felt worse 2 days later than what I felt immediately after the game, because I reflected on it and I thought, but ultimately United have lost that game 3-1. And even in that Gabby Jesus goal, the ball drops and Marcus Rashford puts in what is really quite appalling half-hearted tackle. And Arsenal break and score. And you're going, there's something really, really wrong with this team. And if you remove the belief that a team can be successful, you are in serious trouble. And I think when you look at I said this against Spurs, and to me it was obvious, James, that there was a serious issue with the body language of players. Now, if you look at before that game, Alejandro Garnacho's brother put out a tweet saying something along the lines of, if you knew what I knew why players start, you'd understand a lot more. Sancho was dropped for the Spurs game for showing up late to training. Now, I have it on good authority that he was being topped up for the last couple of weeks before the end of the window by Chelsea. And this has been a consistent problem for Jadon Sancho throughout his career, showing up late to training. issue at Dortmund, it was an issue at England, it's been an issue at United, it's been an issue at Man City, so this is something that follows him. And Ten Hag has been ruthless when it comes to things like this. I mean, he dropped Marcus Rashford before the Wolves game for something similar.
Yep.
But there's another side to this, and that's the favouritism side.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing, you know this as well. Jadon Sancho isn't the only player that thinks that.
Yep.
And it comes down to me.
Yep. He's definitely not the only one. He's not the only one who thinks that. It's not the only one who has this kind of issue. And it's a challenge because you have the issue of lateness and discipline. You also have the issue of, and this is just to present a little bit of both sides of it, because one of the things that separates, I think, good managers, smart managers, good tactical managers from great managers is not necessarily tactics. It's not necessarily their training habits. It's managing egos, and this is true in every sport. Phil Jackson for the Chicago Bulls, he had his thing he came up with, the triangle, this whole like tactic, this whole strategy for basketball that was unique at the time, but actually it's pretty basic. It's a pretty basic thing. The biggest thing he did was manage egos with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, these players, and had some of the most success he'd ever had, that anyone has ever had in coaching. And one of the players he had on that team, Steve Kerr, has done the same thing with the Golden State Warriors for the last 10 years too. And one of the things you see happen in sports is great managers have a way of dealing with players too, beyond the tactics. Pep Guardiola has, that you can have what you have about City and how they run things, and we'll talk about, the club itself at the basis of all of this. But a lot of managers, they have to learn how to manage the differences between these players, because at the end of the day, you've got players between the age of 18 and 35 years old that are millionaires, and they've been millionaires since they were practically kids, and they've never lived the type of life that anyone else has lived, and they're going to be very, very different, it's funny because I saw a lot of comments about how if it was under Sir Alex, he'd be gone, but I actually don't think that's true. Paul Scholes talked about last year with the issue with Ronaldo, how he refused to play a game against Arsenal. Under Sir Alex, he was only 25 years old at the time. He refused to play a game against Arsenal because he wasn't selected for the prior game against Liverpool. He was only 25. I mean, he'd already been, he was successful by then, of course. He was a great player by 25. But he had 12 more years at United after that. 12 more years in his career.
Well, Paul Scholes did the same thing.
Yeah.
Paul Scholes refused to play in a reserve game because he wasn't.
Exactly.
Now, look, these types of things happen all the time, right? And the difference is there wasn't social media.
Yep.
So it wasn't, you were able to keep it quiet. You didn't have leaks. You didn't have players that had easy access to broadcast this stuff.
Yep.
But it got leaked within certain circles. Every single thing that's happening at United now has happened before. I mean, you can guarantee there's been maybe 10 players in the Premier League that are dropped every week for not doing well in training. Right? That is not new to Jadon Sancho, not unique to Jadon Sancho. What is unique, of course, is when Ten Hag finally digs him out.
Yeah.
Because you could have done a million other things and not done that and not put the focus on him. So he clearly did that for a reason. He knew exactly what he was doing. And look, there's been things that have gone on inside football clubs far, far worse. I think there's some different mechanisms, though, some different characteristics to what happened before. Where if you go to other clubs where these types of things happen, there's a very, very clear disciplinary structure. And every once in a while you'll get a player that the discipline doesn't apply to. But they are exceptional players. Like Cantona was... Cantona was immune to a lot of the disciplinary measures that were being applied to other United players, but everyone accepted that he was a different case because he was exceptional and delivered on the pitch. Yep. What you can't have is players immune to disciplinary measures that don't do it on the pitch, because then there's no justification for that type of indifference. And at a club like United, where there isn't a very clear definition of success, and what I mean by that is think about a thought experiment for a second. If you're Richard Arnold, you've got envelope A and envelope B. You can walk into the Glazers at the end of the season and say, envelope A, we won the treble, but we broke even. Or envelope B, we finished in the top four and we made 100 million. Which one would you pick?
Yeah, they're going to pick B every time.
Of course. Right. So the Glazers' definition of success has nothing to do with sport. If you can manage to be successful by making profit, great. But the first priority of Richard Arnold or anybody that works for them is profit. Right? Yep. That's how they define success. Manchester City have a whole different, the whole different focus. They're playing a whole different game. Their definition of success is sport and success. So every single thing inside the football club is geared towards that goal. Every single thing inside Manchester United is geared towards profit. This is why they get led down into making stupid immoral decisions like going for the Super League, because the guiding principle is profit. This is why they launched an investigation into Mason Greenwood when in reality, the only thing they weren't going to do was release him because, again, protecting £100 million asset. So it was one of two options. It was, Richard Arnold, you find a way of bringing him back into the first team, or you loan him out. Pick one, and they pick both.
Yep.
This is how you end up, and when I said, they said, we learned from the Mason Greenwood situation when it came to Anthony. I think the one thing they learned from the Mason Greenwood situation when it comes to Anthony was don't suspend him. Because I think if United had to do the Mason Greenwood thing again, they wouldn't suspend him out of the gate. Because bringing him back then became a story. Especially when they look at what Arsenal were doing with Partey and other, they're like, well, let's just not suspend him. So that bringing him back is in the story, right? And so that we're not put in a situation where we have to consult people to bring him back. So I had a feeling they weren't going to suspend him for this reason. But then it brings up the other problem of, well, now players do genuinely feel justified that you're showing favouritism towards Anthony. Because why is he escaping being suspended? And I'm sure Mason Greenwood's looking at that going, what's different? If Anthony had came first, would Mason Greenwood have been suspended? Probably not. And
it gets worse than that, because, you and I have spoke about, even back to Spurs, some of the body language.
Mm-hmm.
The Mason Greenwood thing had been decided, the U-turn, right? That he wasn't coming back the day before, the night before, really. That Spurs game.
Yeah, pretty much.
And there's players who are very close to Mason Greenwood in that squad. There's players who are very, very close to him in that team, actually. And all other issues aside, there's players that have known him since he was a kid as well.
Mm-hmm.
He's still practically a kid, right? But there's players who've known him since he was very young. There's players who came in and who were presented, who have leadership roles, who wanted to take. There's a brotherhood, same as you'll get in any industry, in any business that is there, and they will feel it when they feel like one of their own is under attack for one reason or another, or when they feel like, okay, the club was telling us one thing, and then they decided not to protect him, right or wrong on the decision, right?
Sure.
That those feelings come into play for these players, and they know him. They know him. A lot of them know him for a long time. A lot of them, still know him and still had a lot of contact over the last some months. And it presented itself there, and it was even potentially a factor. And so what you're saying is true, because even the players will think of it. There are other players who feel that way. And it is hard to separate it out from, this is where it comes into this whole point you're talking about this a standard way of dealing with things. In the U.S. sports, what do? 9 times out of 10, the standard way is we just leave it to the authorities, and the clubs and the teams themselves, they don't do anything. They don't involve themselves in it, right? They simply leave it apart and say, we're going to let this be in the hands of the authorities. And so it's independently investigated. They're going to play while it's happening. If they're charged and they're going to trial, we'll make a decision. And they do that so that, one, they're protected from, why is Richard Arnold now being the judge? Either way, whatever
100%.
decision he makes, Richard Arnold is not a judge. He's not a jury. He's not an investigator. He's not this is not his expertise, and it shouldn't be. And so what is he really judging is most often it's the financial outcomes, right? Not really the actual actions.
Of course.
It's the financial actions. And so you're going to get a lot of problems within the team. because of things like this. And I'm not saying that they're going to say, hey, we want Anthony suspended, because I'm sure that he's got many friends in that locker room too. But they are going to be wondering, there are going to be people more wondering, why is this being treated differently, from a certain perspective, and it causes problems, and it's a lack of any sort of standard policy in the club, a lack of standard human resources that any business would have, which is to say, for two reasons. If someone in a business is getting accused of something, you have the business that has policies to protect themselves, and you have the business that has policies to protect their employees, and you have the business that has policies to make sure they find out the truth of it too and take the right actions. And they have none of that. It's just whatever they think or decide or come up with, and that is going to cause problems in every single camp, with the fans, with sponsors, with staff, and with the players themselves. And it certainly doesn't help with this, with everything going on, and the favoritism types of claims and things like that too.
Look, you had Bruno liking the pie video about Mendy.
Yep.
You have Bruno Fernandes liking the picture on Instagram of Mason Greenwood with his when they had the baby.
Yep.
And back with his partner. So I'm not implying that I'm not claiming that Bruno Fernandes doesn't feel upset at what Mason Greenwood did or is lending him support, but I think you can make some logical inferences from certain players supported him, and I think the fact that again United have no guiding principles that compromise potential profits is the problem here, because they're always led by what's financially expedient. But there's a human aspect to this too. And when the Glazers always acted in their own best interests, no matter what that costs other people, you're going to have complete disharmony, because their interests don't always align with the staff at the football club, with the administrative staff, with other people. I mean, you can bet your life there's people in United that feel very strongly about players that commit these types of things that shouldn't be there because they've experienced it themselves.
Yep.
And when you have owners that contravene their interests and threatening to go on strike, which we know for it was true. I put out a tweet the other day about Richard Arnold's first year. I think the English call it annus horribilis, which genuinely is astonishing. And there's another story come out today. We'll see if we can touch on this, but about United invited a convicted paedophile back to the football club. And when I read that, I wasn't even angry anymore. I had gone beyond anger to genuine, serious concern about the football club. Like, someone has to care here. This is beyond ridiculous. This is absolutely unacceptable. And I really pitied United rather than anger, because at some point this is commensurate with my expectation of these people. This is what you should expect. Anger suggests that I expected they could have made another decision, that there was something else, another decision available to them. But to me, because of what you were talking about, the fact that there is no disciplinary structure, there is no reward or incentive structure that's geared towards sport and success, right? Because they're absentee landlords. And everything is the derivative of that ideology. This is what you get. Absolute, complete chaos. And, Richard Arnold has no qualifications whatsoever to evaluate an evidence and making a decision on Mason Greenwood's innocence or guilt. He's an accountant. Yep. What does he know? And if you look at Ivan Toney is faces an independent investigation into betting.
Yep.
And get suspended. Why can't we do this?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing: if that independent body comes back beyond, because there's two standards here. There's a criminal standard, right, and there's a civil standard, right?
Yep.
If an independent organisation hired by the Premier League, not by Manchester United, so there's no commercial relationship between the two, comes back and says Mason Greenwood has no case to answer or something like that, United can easily bring him back without any criticism.
Full justification.
100%, right. So, this is the results of an independent finding. Then you can't criticise them. But as soon as you're marking your own homework and saying we're bringing them back, you have a serious problem.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it is the issue, and it brings up the issue of why. I mean, I understand why when you're talking about betting, you're talking about something that constitutes the foundation of the sport. If somebody's fixing matches, things like that, is why that thing gets referred to independent investigation. But at the same time, you're talking about a Premier League, and it's not just United; it's the league itself. When we talk about everything, that has pretty much profitability as its only guiding principle too.
Yeah, no, I
That's
know
kind of
it's
underneath
true.
it. There's so many things that they should have independently regulated. When we talk about ownership, when we talk about all of it, why are they allowing the Glazers to use the club like they do?
I completely
Why
agree.
aren't there standards in there from the Premier League itself? And it's the problem is that it always does keep kind of going to the top. It's the top of United, that they don't have carrying owners in this respect, but it's also the top of the Premier League. Why the league isn't set up to support and to handle and to run things for the good of the football itself, and not just the financial product.
Well, there's often a misconception that said, the Glazers have spent X amount of money, right?
Yeah.
So what people need to understand is this: once you go to the stock market and ask for money, you have to publish certain things. One of the things you have to publish is how much money you're going to take out of the club every year.
Yep.
So people are implying that the Glazers could have been taking out hundreds of millions and then in their pockets instead of spending it on transfers. They have a fiscal responsibility to invest in that football club, in the team, once they take money from the stock market. They also depending on, people are buying stocks on the premise they're not going to take a certain amount out. They have to make a certain amount of money before they take it out. All this types of stuff, right? So they can't just go in or commit a heist, rob the club blind. They have to. They have to do what
Yep.
they're doing, right? And what I don't understand is, I mean, I suppose they do in some ways, but when you buy players, that's cosmetic, okay? Uh, the true sign of owners, legitimate owners with commitment to me, is investing in the things that aren't sexy. A new stadium, investing in
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure. The problem with investing in infrastructure is very difficult to scale an ROI. Okay,
Yeah.
so United hire sporting directors, say like Siki Pagurstein, someone who judges themselves solely on the success, the sporting success, and he sits down with Joe Glazer and he says, Joe, I need 20 million for the best in class sports science department. And I guarantee Joe Glazer's going, why would I spend 20 million, right?
Yep.
What's my ROI on that? A
Yep.
player I can sell. And as long as we're getting in the top four, I don't really care. Well,
Yep.
this sports science department is going to allow us to catch our Manchester City and finish first instead of second. I don't really care if we finish second. If first, that's okay with me because it doesn't really affect my revenue. So
Yep.
he sees the value in Manchester United's brand. It wouldn't matter if United played in the park on a Saturday. Right?
Yep.
Because the global reach of the brand is where the value is, right? So doesn't care about a dilapidated stadium, doesn't care. If you want to catch someone in a race, you have to outpace them for a while. And United can't even keep pace, right? City outpaced United for a couple of years and then caught them, and now they're gone. So in order for United to catch City, beyond the acquisition of players, you need to invest in all the other things behind the scenes that narrow the percentages, that make sure that you have proper sports science, proper nutrition, proper sports psychology, proper analytics, proper everything that goes
Yep.
into making sure you get optimal performance from your athletes. You also
Yep.
have a proper disciplinary structure, all this stuff, right? But that costs money that the Glazers don't want to invest in. This is just chaos. And it's the same 2 year entropy every year, organisation to chaos, because none of these things exist at United that exist at other clubs.
Yep. Exactly. And obviously that subject could go endlessly with United in terms of what they haven't done, and keeping up. One of the things that they have done, or that has been happening under John Murtaugh and Richard Arnold and them, that maybe does deserve a little bit of credit. And part of the challenge that we always have in talking about these things, you put out a tweet the other day about how and I've said this quite a few times on my videos and things too, that it's very difficult for the people within the club, because
Yeah.
these are normal people, right?
Yeah,
A lot of these
exactly.
people have the best interests of the club at heart, and they're
100%.
trying. and they're very much trying
Really
to do
good
the right
people.
thing. And a lot of times when you talk about anything good that they might be doing, people start to equate every good thing that is being done as praise for the Glazers,
Of
and it's quite the
course.
opposite. A lot of stuff happens that's good in spite of them, essentially, or that they managed to figure out. And one of those things is that, and I want to talk about this because I think this would be an interesting topic for people to understand as well, and to look at in maybe a little bit of a more positive sense. One of the things that's going on last year or a bit earlier, they worked on bringing in and enhancing the data science and analytics department, because it was essentially evaluated that United weren't just behind; they were practically non-existent in
Yes.
terms of data and analytics. And this is something Jose Mourinho said years and years ago, and he's not even particularly a modern coach in a lot of ways when it comes to analytics. That United were miles and miles behind on so many things, and they hired a very good hire in Dominic Jordan, who's a very highly rated individual, to kind of rebuild that analytics and data science, and that has to do with performance and all of that. And it also has to do with scouting players, signings, things like that. One of the problems that ties into everything we've seen, of course, is that the majority of the signings that have happened under Ten Hag, especially in the first season, almost exclusively, were his players, right? Players that he targeted and he looked at. And so we brought in Lissandro Martinez because he played for him. We brought in Taro Malaysia because he watched him in the Dutch league. We brought in Anthony on a lot of money because Erik ten Hag liked him. Goes to Weghorst. It goes to, unfortunately, issues with people like Arnautovic, where they had to do a U-turn after he vouched for him because of racial issues. This is something you and I talked about and brought up, and even gave direct feedback on the club too when that signing was being considered, and they had to kind of change course on that. And then this year, obviously, Sofian Amrabat is somebody that Erik ten Hag knows.
Yeah, from me, too.
Yeah, and Mason Mount, tentatively, that one I wouldn't put quite on Erik ten Hag's plate. He definitely,
Well,
he
he certainly
proves
liked him
everything.
when he played against
Yeah,
them with Vitesse.
yeah,
When he played,
but
and
he
he
has been
really
in the
signaled. He
eyes
tried to
of
sign him, but
United too.
yes,
Yeah,
same with Bayunder as well. But yes,
yes, yep. And the only player this summer that you would say has been almost exclusively identified, followed, and watched by the club is Rasmus Højlund, that they signed this year. Has no connection to Erik ten Hag. Is a different type of player. Obviously, the manager has a say. They're going to approve everything. They absolutely should have a say. They're a big part of this, council, or whatever you want to call it, in terms of any structure. They have a say. And it's going to be a big test of this new structure, these analysts, this department, to see how these players that they start to identify do, because we're not going to be just signing Erik ten Hag names for the next years. And I think we've almost even reached the end of that. Rasmus Højlund being the first one to really get a test of. But I think that's part of alloying some of the critiquing, because one could criticize, and myself included, on Anthony, on some of the signings, on some of the things that have occurred, except it shouldn't really be his job in the first place. Erik ten Hag to identify and be the person deciding everything on transfers. That's, no club runs that way. No successful club runs that way either.
I agree 100%. Here's some of my. I mean, you have to say for the most part it's been successful.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets a little bit dicey for me. So Ten Hag's coming in and saying, "I want the young, I want all these players," right? And you're reacting to that and trying to get them who you want. The problem is, they might be well known to United on the pitch, but how well are they known off the pitch?
Right.
And how much time have you had to really look into their background and evaluate them as human beings and say, is this someone that, what risks are we taking here? Because that matters, right?
Yep.
And, Ten Hag has got quite a questionable record. He backed Overmars
Yeah.
at Ajax. No question, Arnautovic was, someone that he went after. He was certainly someone that endorsed Mason Greenwood. And I think the Anthony situation is something that will affect him. because that is 100% down to Ten Hag. Even if Anthony didn't have this thing going off the pitch, for me, one thing, I think Ten Hag's done an exceptional job, but one thing that kind of irked me a bit is when you're complaining about your team not scoring goals, and one of the reasons is your £85 million winger isn't.
It's with one goal since his first 3 games.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have bought him, Eric. Maybe you should have went after a central striker, because it was blatantly obvious to me. United could have got away with not having Anthony last season, but if they had a central striker, that would have made a much bigger difference on that team. And I think that that is one mistake that I feel, he deserves criticism on. And Anthony, in that, and even beyond what we've said, this goes now to other players that are looking at this going, how come this guy never gets dropped? How come this guy? And even you can even see, you even saw it last season when he was getting brought off in games. His pissed off attitude. Like, wait a minute, you didn't do anything. And here's the thing, James, if he's guilty of what he's been accused of, people need to remember that the victim isn't the problem here. Anthony was the one that let United down. A couple of months into a £85 million move as your new manager at a club where he's under pressure and you're battering women. I mean, why can't you behave? You have a sense of responsibility to the club, to yourself, to your family, to the fans. And you also knew at that point about Mason Greenwood. And you're out doing this, And again, this is why it's so important that United show zero tolerance towards the likes of Mason Greenwood. Because maybe Anthony's looking at that going, well, they want to bring him back, so I've got no problems. They're going to take care of me, I mean, I don't know. I can't say that's the case, but I'm looking at that going, if this is true, and the evidence is quite, it's quite inculpatory, to be honest. Remember what happened here. Anthony let United down, but is there a question mark to answer about Ten Hag's ability to evaluate people?
There is. I mean, there certainly is, and part of it is this point of, again, he's a football coach, and in some respects, I don't want to. It's sort of like it's similar to the point of Richard Arnold too, right? Like, I wouldn't expect Richard Arnold to be good at evaluating people as to who they are and their individuality. Now, as the CEO of a football club, should he be setting up things that allow them to do a little more research and a little more talk and a little more check-ins? One of the things I will say is that United used to rely under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. They I know they relied heavily on asking senior members of the playing squad about some of the history of players, and they turned down quite a few signings because of that. And 2 of those players who were very heavily relied on were Nemanja Matic and Juan Mata, who knew a lot of people from over the years, were very well respected and viewed as 2 players with exceptional, track records as human beings. And it's not a perfect system. Some things slip through the cracks. But, there was a lot of people turned down there. And part of it is that any system where you have one person making all the calls, you're going to make mistakes. Any system that doesn't have a checks and balances, that doesn't have support, you're going to make mistakes. Yeah, Ten Hag clearly has a problem with, either not caring about it because it's not his forte, or being inaccurate in his assessment of individuals. I mean, even the De Jong situation is not nearly as serious. He thought he would come. That's why they spent so long on it. He thought he would join after conversations with him, and he wouldn't. He refused the whole summer. They thought he would join. And so there is I think there are questions that have to be asked of the assessment of personalities, but it is why you need a support system. I spent a good couple of months leading up to the window on my videos and such, talking about one thing that I say, which is you have to protect managers from themselves. It's something I think very strongly. You have to protect managers from themselves. You have to they're going to make huge mistakes if you give them all the ability. Jurgen Klopp has had some success at Liverpool, but funnily enough, since certain departures, they've gotten worse. He's struggled. because they've essentially turned over almost everything right back to him, making the final call on everything. There's stories from years back about how he wanted to sign a different player to Mohamed Salah, who, and things like that didn't work out very well, and was, overstated when you have Michael Edwards and people in charge who are very successful at what they do in terms of running the football side. And that's personality based, that's football based, but you have to protect managers from themselves, because they can't be everything. I think that those days of football are gone.
I completely agree with that. I think one thing that I might slightly disagree on is that I think Richard Arnold should be in a position to be able to evaluate people.
That's true.
If you are a CEO of a company, you have to be able to read people.
Yeah.
You have to be able to make good decisions on the people that you're hiring. You don't
But
have to be.
let me ask you one question on that. Should he ever talk to the football players themselves in terms of evaluating? Like, should he be in that? He should hire people to do it, but should he ever be involved in evaluating footballers themselves as the CEO?
I look at his contemporaries. With Florentino Perez, yes. I think that I get what you're saying. I think you could still mount an argument for both, right?
True.
And you do have to trust the decision of decision making of your football team, but and what I mean, murder
structure.
But here's the thing: there's two aspects to this, and this has to be considered when you're a club the size of United. You have to evaluate players on and off the pitch. So your football department comes to you with the list of players saying, we like this guy, we like this guy, we like this guy. Okay, then what we're going to do on the other side is we're going to employ high-end people that are able to, maybe, I don't know if they're behavioural scientists, whatever, they can look at a human being and say, you can't predict human behaviour, it's impossible, I get that, but you can look at certain things and say, okay, this guy has a track record of this guy has a track record, we've seen some of this, because things like physical abuse or sexual assault don't usually show up at 21, 22. Right? These are usually problems that predate that. They're usually not a one-off. But I mean, usually when human beings get to this point, there's loads of signs that this is, that this has been an issue. I mean, Mason Greenwood, if you look at Mason Greenwood's behaviour prior to what happened, there was lots. The warning signs were blinking red for a long, long time about this kid. Rafa Morrison, it's not unusual for kids to behave badly. That happens. But to me, I think you have to be conscious of what you're doing when it comes to signing certain players. You can't be sitting taking in the heat and going the same work going out of it. Even the most basic.
Yeah, that was so easy to check on. I mean, it was
that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I'm not asking much. Like, I saw an article the other day saying that Manchester United have finally accepted that players should be given merit-based contracts and not massive contracts, and that they're going to stop doing it. What? I mean, this is. I don't care how. I don't care what position you occupy in life. This was blatantly obvious a decade ago. I mean, they ignored all this advice from football. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do. And they did it.
Yeah.
And now, 10 years later, when you're broke, you finally come to the realization that maybe you shouldn't be rewarding players with wages that aren't commensurate with their market value. I mean, who decided to give David De Gea 375 grand a week, and based on what logic? Who else was giving it to him? I mean, I can understand if there's someone else in the background wanting to take your keeper offer and that, and you say, okay, we'll pay that to keep you. No one else is going to do that. Who else was giving Maguire a 6-year contract for what? Right? All this stuff that is a major impediment to United's convalescence, right? So because now they can't, this is an impediment for Ten Hag. I mean, this summer we talk about a dressing room that we're in. He has now been told, here's Maguire and here's McTominay, 2 players we wanted to sell, 2 players that the club have defined as not good enough. That I've now been told, listen, Scott, listen, Harry, we can't afford your replacement. And bear in mind, they considered doing this with De Gea. So go back in that first team and give us 100%. I know the manager doesn't like you, but go out on that field and give us 100%. I mean, what? It's insane. But see, this is what I'm saying. Like, if this was at City, they'd be gone, right? If this was at Real Madrid, these clubs that define themselves by their sporting success, these players would not be there. Right? This is how Matteo Darmian lasted years at United, because you can sell him, but you're getting 1.2 million to replace your right back. Okay, well, what's the point?
Yeah,
Right? And
exactly.
so they're not good enough, but the problem is you can't get enough money for them to buy quality replacements, so you're stuck with them.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, and you know, you're confronted by that incompetence everywhere you look. Well, I'm confronted by the incompetence of Moises Caicedo,
Yeah.
confronted by the confidence of Erling Haaland, Jude
Yep.
Bellingham, right? I
Yep.
mean, three of the best young players in the world who Solskjaer wanted, and
Yeah.
United couldn't get any of them over the line.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it is funny in that respect because without the structure, this is why it's like, managers are all going to be different. Without the structure, when you look at it, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had some amazing, amazing football
Unbelievable.
targets. I mean, the team he was trying to build, you look at it, his preference for players includes Jude Bellingham, Declan Rice, Jack Grealish, Erling Haaland. You know,
Skriniar,
he could have built an amazing team, but they were not competent enough to get it done.
Thiago
And
Alcantara.
yeah, it's yeah, exactly. The things I don't want to talk about. The ones that weren't so big linked, but you could build an entire 11 that's probably Premier League winning with the players they missed out on under 2 or 3 summers under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer for sure. It'd be one of the best teams in the world probably. But they're trying it. And one of the things too, now that I do want to talk about from an information perspective that I know that people are interested in, one of the obvious perceptions you get from everything we've discussed is that they only work like when the transfer window opens. And it's partially true that in a lot of instances the Glazers themselves are only sanctioning moves and approving things during the window, and they wait until the last moments to make decisions on things, and they delay and all of that. But United are working pretty heavily on trying to identify and put together targets for the next year. And that is, when I was talking about the revamped kind of analytics and department and all of that, that is one of the things they're trying to improve and get done. So they have these targets next year because they're conscious of the fact they cannot just keep recruiting Eric Ten Hag players and for the team. And there's a couple interesting things I want to mention here that I haven't shared, because there's one story, one particular name that I've been looking at that I just think people would find very interesting. And it's in the midfield. One of the things that I've heard said is that United actually do expect Casemiro to depart in the next 1 to 2 years at maximum for Saudi. They expect that that's going to happen. That is a likelihood that that could occur. I think that a lot of people watching the first few games have some concerns over the longevity of Casemiro. We know that in a lot of instances, Brazilian players tend to slow down in their 30s pretty heavily and kind of fall off. When we look at some of the
I'm
other
not getting into the
examples,
reasons why. Same
some of the
reasons
other
I fell off in my
examples,
30s.
but Fabinho fell off from probably one of the best midfielders in the world to being out essentially from Liverpool pretty quickly. And Casemiro's slowing down, let's put it that way. But either way, they do need to look at a long-term replacement. And I know that obviously they're already scouting at center back pretty heavily. We saw a lot of the names listed when they were looking at replacing Maguire in Toribo and some of these other names. They've got a bunch of names in Portugal, like Antonio Silva. They have Inacio. There's a lot of people they're looking at there. But in the midfield, what's real interesting, and this just gives you a bit of the idea as well of the challenges that the football department are running into. One of the things that I know for sure that they did this summer prior to signing Sofiane Amrabat on loan, and there was a lot of stories about them actually contacting a lot more midfielders, right? Thuram and others. A name that was not mentioned is Ezekiel Palacios from he plays in Germany right now. He's a 24-year-old. Leverkusen. Yeah, he's an Argentine and very good player, very very highly rated player right now, kind of up and coming. And they're looking at him. They actually were trying to get a deal done for next year to bring him in on loan with a buy to next summer. And what it tells you in one respect that's good, and one respect that's very frustrating, is that they've already identified the long-term Casemiro replacement. Sofiane Amrabat isn't that guy. He's coming in as a rotation. They probably, if he has a decent year, will sign him. But they need more. That's a replacement for Scott McTominay. Sofiane Amrabat is a McTominay replacement at the end of the day. In terms of replacing Casemiro, they need somebody. And if it was, as we've said, City or even Liverpool at times, but definitely Madrid. Look what they've already done. They've already replaced Casemiro. Look at all the players they have in their midfield. It's insane the number of players, so many that for a moment Chouameni looked like he might be available because they have so many midfielders in there, and he was struggling to find a place in the team. A player of that quality, being available because of that, and they replaced Casemiro. We would have replaced Casemiro, and that's one of the frustrating things is the football department knows we've got a player in mind who could replace Casemiro. We'd love to bring him in now and start easing him in so that we can, and we've got the player there already. And it's not this desperate scramble to Casemiro's we're going to replace once he's already like completely fallen off a cliff performance wise. We're desperate. We don't have another player. And that means when that player comes in, because tying back to Anthony, tying back to Jadon Sancho, when that player comes in, and now Rasmus Højlund, who's going to have to deal with that this season, when that player comes in, they're expected to instantly perform at top level immediately. No bacon time, no nothing, because they're replacing someone who's done, who's finished. And that's how it always is at United, is when they're replacing someone, they're finished. Wan-Bissaka had to come in, at 20 years old after one season in the Premier League and become a starting right back. And his development was, I think, very much stunted by that as well. The demands that were placed on him. And that happens at every single position. Jadon Sancho had to come in. We had no right wing. The season went to a total mess. Even Anthony, he comes in, he has to perform right away at right wing because we don't have other options who are already working. Rasmus Højlund's going to have to come in 9 goals in his career in senior football in Italy. He looks great. Don't get me wrong. I thought when he came on, he looked fantastic. He's huge. He's physical. I think there's a lot of positives. But the fact that he's going to have to perform immediately for United to succeed with the money that they spent on him continues to be the problem. So they identify these people ahead. They're looking at it. They think we've got someone we could bring in who could be a long-term Casemiro replacement. But they can't bring him in now because the Glazers are telling him, well, the only way you're going to get him is if you can get him on loan. And of course, why are Leverkusen going for that? Why would they want to go for something like that?
Yeah, and so really this is part of the problem because the 10% Rasmus Højlund was last season. You can bring him in and you can bet him in for a year or two because you've got players that are ready to start. But now you've got to bring him in a year later at 3 times the price, and then he's got to adjust. I know that I told you this about him, 3-4 weeks ago when it came up again in the media, that they do like that Marcus Leonardo guy from Santos. He's someone that they've spent quite a bit of time looking at the South American market. I know they really, really, really want to improve the depth at under 23 level because they see how that at CIS FFP with Chelsea and other clubs. So I know they're looking, and that probably could be available for around 20 million, so that could be within United's price range, but again it all depends on what happens in January. I think we're more or less close to getting done. I don't want to do much more over an hour. Do you have 5 more minutes, or you got to run?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, we can take 5 more minutes.
Okay, yeah. So don't want to bore people too long. For about an hour should be enough. But so I know that they've been looking at Marcus Leonardo. I know they've been spending quite a bit of time looking at the Serbian Croatian market with this young Croatian kid. But I know they like the young lad Kovacevic, I think it is, at Partizan Belgrade. He's a young centre back. And this is where United really have to be much better at getting those players in at that age. I mean, we talk about Moises Caicedo, right? Every time I'd see United linked with him when this price was around 100 million, you're going, it's just an illustration of their incompetence. That 24 months after not being able to sign him for 4.5 million, you're there willing to pay close to 100 million for him. Whereas really what should be happening is, why are we not getting these players this early? And I think that's something that they really have to do better on. But again, I think this is also a consequence of, like we said, with the ownership structure down, where it is really, really difficult to get them to approve moves for players at early ages. Obviously, the younger you get, the higher the probability is they won't make it. But and the longer, they want players that they can put in the first team, and bring in free players, from the academy, develop them and put them in. So this is something that hopefully by next year the Glazers aren't there. Let me ask you about that, because that is obviously one of the big questions. When we look at United, I'll tell you one thing's definitely changed for me. We talk to people inside the club. I've been talking to people inside United for close to a decade. And, there's always been an acknowledgement that, the fans have some really good points about the Glazers. There's always been, they've always, well, they're good people, actually they do care, blah, 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 all this. This is the first time that I've sensed that is starting to change, where there's a frustration with the owners that goes right to the very top. Mm-hmm. In fact, I have got a message 2 days ago from someone in a relatively high, extremely high position in the United, saying they have to sell. And so when you've got your staff threatening to go out on strike, and you've got Adam Crafton getting stories that are briefed from a very, very, very high level, which was being briefed against the Glazers is more than anything. I think I'm especially when you look at all the damage that's been done to United commercially. They say they don't care, but they have to care, because they're not the City owners, they're not the Newcastle owners. They can afford not to care, but the Glazers can't, because they're brand conscious. You just wonder what would be the utility in keeping a hold of United at this point. It's not going to dramatically increase in value over the next year.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is the challenge, and it is that, I agree with you, because we've talked about it before, but I was just saying to someone this morning, this recent story that came out today, right, about this thing with this pedophile who was invited to the club, right? This happened like a year ago, I think. And when you look at the timing of all of this, you start to wonder, is somebody just fed up and leaking these stories out to the media 100%, at this point? 100%. Because you get every minutia of this Greenwood thing leaked out. And from people you and I have spoken to, we got the idea, at first not the case, but the more it went on, we started to get the idea that the Glazers are very much involved in this. I started to get really suspicious when we got a lot of stories being briefed about how they weren't involved in the Greenwood decision at all, that it was probably the exact opposite, and we started to get the idea that, hey, maybe it wasn't necessarily all on Richard Arnold, even though he is their CEO and appointed by them. But as we know, as we've seen many times with things over the years, they get involved in everything. And I just strongly get the impression very recently that somebody's pretty much fed up. And these stories are not going to end. And there's probably a lot more to come. Somebody is going to be airing out, the dirty laundry at United. And there's a lot of it. I mean, there's a lot of it there. I mean, when you go back to even just the basic things we talked about on the transfer front from 2020 and all of that, and Joel Glazer being the de facto director of football at Manchester United that he's been for a decade, there's a lot more worse things that could come out about United. And I do get the idea, part of me worries that it's because they get the feeling they are sticking, and digging their heels in a little bit, that these stories are starting to come out, that someone's really trying to push the issue. And I think that there's some truth to that. I think that the issue with all these stories you're seeing is, at the end of the day, the Glazers want more money. I think that, I think there was a propensity from Joel and Avram to go with a deal that will allow them to stick around and see that long-term value come into play, under the Ineos deal or something like that. But they can't all agree because they're all too greedy on this front. And they're thinking, well, we're just going to try to get more money. I don't know what the value is of holding it. I can see, I don't know. I think they probably know the club's never going to be worth 10 billion under them. But at the same time, they're probably thinking it could be worth 10 billion under someone else. And they'd like to see that value, which doesn't really make any sense, because you don't sell something for what you think someone else could do for it. But I do strongly get the idea there's people within who are done, who are a bit finished, and who are sick of taking as well a lot of the blame for everything that goes on the day-to-day basis.
When you look at the fact that they're being pummeled by ex-pros on TV, they've had Cristiano Ronaldo come out and pummel them. They've had consistent protests online. They've gone from
Yep.
one catastrophe to the next. I mean, we're not talking about football results here. We're talking about sleaze on a
Yeah.
level that is extremely damaging to United's reputation. That's the type of stuff that pisses off commercial partners. Not just the ones that you have, but any potential new ones. Imagine you're in United marketing department and you're sitting down with a brand saying, hey, don't miss your opportunity to be part of a football club that has gone from one scandal to the next, and that's pedophiles the club without doing due diligence. We tried to sign racists without the due diligence. We tried to bring in an alleged rapist back into the team until the fans revolted. Our staff wanted to go out on strike. We've now got our other winger that is now being abused or being accused of abuse, and our other one has just come out and slated the manager. I mean, what an opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, it must be absolutely impossible, because if you've got that type of money to spend on brand association, there's Real Madrid, there's other clubs, you don't need this, right?
Yep.
So what's the justification? Oh, by the way, you've no fan equity because your fans hate you. So what exactly are you leveraging for me? So you look at all the other, the journalists now. There's all the journalists are just, it's open season on them.
Yep.
You have personalities that are coming out and criticizing the Glazers that aren't even, that are celebrities and stuff. You're going,
Yep.
I know that they're relatively immune to a lot of this, but there's always a threshold. There's always a point where, and I believe once commercial partners starts putting the squeeze, I mean, United, being Manchester United's shirt sponsor used to be one of the most prized opportunities for sports marketing in any sport. And now United can't replace their shirt sponsor. I mean, they were put on notice 10 months ago that they wanted to replace it. That should have been replaced in a month.
Yep.
There should have been a line at the door
Yep.
for people queuing up to give them a bit more money, but there isn't. And
Yep.
so when you start pissing off commercial partners like this, it gets very, very difficult. I also believe the Premier League have to be really concerned, because a significant part of their branding is the health of their top clubs. And when they're looking at their top clubs being constantly dragged through the mud, scandal after scandal after scandal, I think for them there has to be a major concern about how this is being run. And I just feel there's a tipping point for them where they can't afford a Ten Hag failure. If this season falls apart, where's the money coming from for another manager and another rebuild and all that? It's not there anymore. I don't see what else they could do to mitigate that. I think this was what it was always designed for. I think the father bought it, said to them, look, here's the plan. You use this football club to enrich yourself for as long as possible. And once it's leveraged to the hilt, you sell it.
Right?
And I think we're at the point where there's nothing else they can do to mitigate fan, outrage and all that. And I just think that especially when you look at what it would take for United to be successful again, I mean, it's not just investment in the stadium. There's so many things that would need to be done, and I just don't think they can do it. I honestly don't believe they'll, I mean, I've said this before, but I just don't think they'll last at the end of the season. I don't think they can. But we shall see, my friend. We'll be back again next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's about time we put our marathon WhatsApp voice messages onto a recording.
Yeah, exactly. And now that we've kind of got through the foundation of all the shit going on, we can we can talk about some more interesting things each and every week to keep up and keep informed, because there's always a lot more good and bad that's going on behind the scenes and happening at United, and it'll be happy to get that out to everybody, all the things we've been talking about.
Yes, we will keep doing these. So hopefully things get better as the season goes on. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast, folks. Like I said, this will be available on all James's platforms and mine, and we'll continue to do that for the foreseeable future. Eventually, I suppose we'll do these live and we'll open up comments and stuff. We'll take questions once I get my makeup on. Then we'll do them live. And, thank you for taking the time to do this, my friend. It's been a long time coming, so we look forward to talking to you next week, buddy.
Yeah, you too. It was great.
Right,
thanks.
See you. Cheers.